The Diocese of Marquette, Michigan. The story of the faith began here with fearless missionary priests. It grew and developed through the ministry of a saintly bishop and is still being written today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop John Doerfler.
There's something, the priest sees when he picks up the chalice. He sees his reflection in the blood of Christ. That it's this opportunity to unite oneself more deeply with the Lord in his own sacrifice for the salvation of his people.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, amid 1,700 miles of shoreline and acres of pristine forests, is the city of Marquette, sea city of the Diocese of Marquette.
The name of the diocese recalls the French missionary legacy that helped shape the early history of the church in the region. The first French missionaries came to the region in the mid-1600s to evangelize native peoples, and St. Isaac Jogues celebrated the first Mass in the region. A few years later, Father Marquette established a permanent settlement at Sault Ste. Marie.
Father Jacques Marquette was a French Jesuit who was sent to the area as a missionary. He was very conversant in many of the Native American languages, being able to speak at least 6 dialects. Extraordinarily instrumental in helping to establish some of the missions in the Upper Peninsula area, but was also very well known for being one of the first Europeans to map out the route of the Mississippi River down into the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. So he meets a wonderful young explorer named Louis Joliet. In spring of 1673, they have 2 canoes with 5 oarsmen between them, and they begin this journey going through Wisconsin, down the Mississippi River, all the way down to Arkansas, and then they decide to stop because they were entering into Spanish territory and they were afraid of being captured. But we know so much about their trip because each of these gentlemen kept journals as well as drew extensive maps of their voyage. They eventually go back to tell the tale and having survived this wonderful, wonderful adventure.
As important as the early French missionaries were to the region, the growth of the diocese really owes a debt to the second wave of missionary activity in the early to mid-1800s, led by Father Frederick Baraga, a native of Slovenia.
Father Baraga arrived in the New World on December 31st, 1830. For the next 37 years, he traveled throughout the Great Lakes area to minister to the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. During the winter months, he traveled on snowshoes, giving him the title the Snowshoe Priest. He authored 20 Native American books, including his famous Grammar and Dictionary of the Chippewa language, still in use today. He would later become the first bishop to write a pastoral letter in both the English and Chippewa languages.
Winter is about 6 months long here, and there is a fair amount of snow. And that might be an understatement. He traveled all around this region, even throughout the winter in very harsh conditions, and traveled on snowshoes.
In 1853, Pope Pius IX separated territory from the Diocese of Detroit to create the Vicariate Apostolic of Upper Michigan. On January 9, 1857, he raised this vicariate to the status of a diocese, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie, with Bishop Baraga as the first bishop.
And he took delight in the number of converts that he gained for the Catholic Church. He was a strong defender of Native Americans and their interests. He spoke out against their forced relocation and took it upon himself to better understand Native languages and culture. It showed his close connection to them and his appreciation for their language and culture.
His cause for canonization was opened in 1952 by Thomas Lawrence Noah, the diocese's 8th bishop, and the formal canonization process began in 1973. On May 10th, 2012, Baraga was declared venerable by Pope Benedict XVI, and his cause for canonization remains open. Bishop Baraga's legacy can still be felt in the city of Marquette today, perhaps nowhere as clearly as in the Cathedral of St. Peter. The original parish was founded by the Jesuit priest, Father Jean-Baptiste Manet, who began holding services on the site in a small log cabin. When Bishop Baraga moved the see of the diocese from Sault Ste. Marie to Marquette, construction on a new, more prominent church began in 1864, with Baraga himself laying the cornerstone. Tragically, this cathedral was destroyed by fire in 1879.
In a way, it was a blessing in disguise, since the original cathedral had been poorly constructed and was too small to serve the needs of the growing diocese. Bishop Verton oversaw the work of building the new $40,000 cathedral, with the first donation coming from his own father.
The current cathedral is the result of a significant renovation project that took place after a fire in 1935 destroyed everything but the sandstone walls.
As you enter the Cathedral of St. Peter, your eyes are drawn to the high altar, and there's a Latin inscription above the altar that says, "Tu es Petrus, so you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against it." Underneath it says, "And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." So this is drawn from the Gospel of Matthew. It is Christ bestowing the keys of the kingdom of heaven upon St. Peter. Directly above this Latin inscription, we see Christ. His body is inscribed in a full body halo called a mandorla, which literally means almond in Italian. It's an almond-shaped halo. It represents the breakthrough of the heavenly realm into the earthly realm, or earthly time and space. Christ is flanked by 2 angels. One of the angels offers a model of the Church of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the other angel offers a model of the church, this particular cathedral. Directly over the altar, there's a barrel vault of stars. So you see the stars beautifully depicted in this barrel vault, and it's supposed to represent the heavens coming to hover over this sacred place on the altar where heaven and earth meet in the Eucharist. The steeples are adorned with domes that are covered in colorful terracotta tiling and flanked by stylized angels on each of the 4 corners.
The liturgies here at the cathedral are quite beautiful. They're celebrated with great dignity, a solemnity, and with very beautiful music. My predecessor, Archbishop Sample, wrote a beautiful letter on sacred music, and it's probably one of the best summaries of the Church's teaching on music that I've read. So I've taken a few steps to help implement, the Church's teaching on sacred music. There's something about this music form that has a deep capacity for communicating the sacred, because there's the text of the words, which contain a proclamation of the faith, as it will. But then there's the beauty of the music that breaks open, so to speak, the mystery of God that goes beyond words. The cathedral is, they say, the mother church of the diocese. It's also the place where the bishop's chair is, the cathedra. That's where a cathedral gets its name. It is a symbol of the teaching office of the bishop, which is in reality the proclamation of the gospel and the importance of the mission of the church in doing such. I, in some ways, maybe say that the proclamation of the gospel comes from here and goes all over the diocese.
The cathedra, or chair, represents Bishop Doerfler's authority as the Apostle of Marquette.
I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, just not too terribly far from Marquette. It's about 4 hours south by driving, and had a very happy childhood, actually. My parents were both very zealous and faithful Catholics. Some of my earliest memories are of my father taking me to visit the church. I started thinking about becoming a priest a bit during my junior year of high school. I was very much engaged in youth ministry activities. The primary reason is that I wanted my friends to know about Jesus. And so I was engaged in youth ministry really for that purpose. I would say my college years were the most formative years of my adulthood and also for priesthood. It was during that time that I had a very fine spiritual director, and my prayer life deepened considerably during those years. The philosophy department at St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota was particularly fine, and really set the intellectual foundation for everything else I've done since that time. After college seminary, I did attend the North American College in Rome. At that time, Bishop Maida, now Cardinal Maida, who was the Bishop of Green Bay, sent me to study in Rome. It was an opportunity to grow in a much deeper understanding firsthand of the universality of the church. I was ordained a transitional deacon in Rome, and I was ordained a priest in Green Bay. I was a priest of the Diocese of Green Bay. There are probably two moments of the ordination rite that I find particularly meaningful. One is during the Litany of Saints, where we lie prostrate and beg the intercession of all the saints in heaven. And then, of course, the laying on of hands by the bishop and then by the priests of the diocese. My first 4 years as a priest was spent as a parochial vicar at a rather large parish in the Diocese of Green Bay. We had a big grade school. There were many opportunities to be engaged, not only at the school, but also in the life of the faithful. Somewhere down the line, I had the responsibility for youth ministry in the parish as well. Youth ministry as a priest, in addition just to spending time with young people in a fatherly role now, was also helping to engage the parents to take a lot of responsibility for youth ministry in the parish. I did not want the things to be built around me. So when I would be transferred or moved, which would happen someday, that things would continue in the parish.
Father Doerfler continued his academic studies as a priest, and in 1997 he was awarded the Licentiate in Canon Law, the JCL, from the Catholic University of America. He went on to the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family, where he received a doctorate in sacred theology.
I've always had interests in academics in one way or another. Academics as a priest or even a seminary student is primarily a contemplative exercise. It's not just about taking exams or writing papers or reading books or attending lectures, but it's the opportunity to meditate more deeply on the mystery of who God is, because ultimately He is the subject of all the study. Theology, and I would even say canon law, is learned best on one's knees, because canon law is not just rules or regulations, but it's the application of what we believe in the life of the church. And being thoroughly imbued in that mystery is what's most important in studies.
After years of priestly ministry, which included work in the marriage tribunal, pastor, seminary professor, vicar general, and chancellor of the diocese, on December 17, 2013, Father Doerfler was named the next bishop of the Diocese of Marquette.
The initial call came the day before. Nuncio had called the chancery in Green Bay. I was down in Milwaukee, and so I had received a phone call from the secretary that the nuncio called for me. I called the nuncio's office back, and given that Milwaukee's in Central Time and Washington, D.C. is in Eastern Time, the nuncio's office had just closed. Let's just say I spent a lot of time in the chapel that night. So when I called the nunciature the next morning, it was a pretty simple and direct conversation. He said something like this: "Monsignore, I have an announcement for you that is of a great importance for the Church. The Holy Father has chosen you to be the Bishop of Marquette." That was basically it. I accepted. I would not consider the office of bishop to be a promotion, but really a calling for greater sacrifice. We're not in ministry for honor or accolades or promotions. Being a priest or being a bishop is not a job. Being a priest or being a bishop is really offering one's life in service to God and his people for the proclamation of the gospel and bringing people to salvation. That's what it's about. And the call to being a bishop, I'd say, is just a call to a deeper sacrifice in that regard. My motto is Evangelii Gaudium, or the joy of the gospel. This is the title of Pope Francis' apostolic exhortation on evangelization. It just so happened that the Holy Father had released or promulgated this exhortation just a couple weeks before I got the phone call. So I had very recently read it, and so it was fresh in my mind. One of these practical things that suddenly I had to think about after I got the phone call was, well, what would my motto be? And given the importance of evangelization in the life of the Church, and that the Holy Father had just released his exhortation and I had just read it, that's what came first to my mind as my motto.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Doerfler has worked to lead his people with the heart of a shepherd and to invite others to share in the joy of the gospel through an emphasis on evangelization.
I think it's important for us to remember that evangelization is primarily the work of the Holy Spirit. You know, there's nothing that we do that can make someone else believe. And it's up to us to allow ourselves to be transformed by the Spirit, to be His instruments in bringing the faith to others. Evangelization is not a program. It's living the Christian life with deep vitality and, in a certain sense, this desire to share what's most important in our life, Jesus Christ, with others.